And I always felt other people are much more interesting than I am. So I always had a lot of questions. I was more of an interrogator than a storyteller. I remember early on in Africa talking to people, and I recall very distinctly being in a village in 63, 64, talking to an old guy and realizing that this person that I'm talking to was born in the 19th century. Was born in 1890, let's say. Would have remembered the First World War. I never tape recorded these conversations, but I always thought, this is amazing. I'm talking to someone who lived in a previous century and saw things that no one I know has ever seen or known. And I often think when people say, have you been to Bhutan? Have you been to Bali? Have you been to this part of Brazil? And I sometimes think, because I'm an old guy, well, I've been to a place where you have never been. It's called the past. I've been to the past.
That was Paul Theroux. I'm Jamie Brisick. You're listening to Soundings, brought to you by the Surfers Journal. The Surfers Journal is a reader-supported publication made possible by sponsorship from Birdwell, FCS, Patagonia, Rainbow, Vans, Vissla, and Yeti. More book than magazine, it delivers 120 pages of independent storytelling in each issue, covering the people, culture, travel, and art of surfing. Members receive the magazine 6 times yearly, in addition to unlimited access to the magazine's archives, discounts in its store, plus subscriber-only access to additional digital content, this podcast for instance, exclusive film screenings, and sponsor offers. To subscribe, please visit surfersjournal.com. So, Paul Theroux, 81 years old, lives half the year on the East Coast in Cape Cod, and lives half the year on the North Shore. Paul Edward Theroux is an American novelist and travel writer who has written numerous books, including the travelogue The Great Railway Bazaar in 1975. Some of his works of fiction have been adopted as feature films. Paul was a huge hero of mine from a very young age. When I started traveling on the world tour in 1986, my father gave me books to read because I would be stuck on planes for 20 hours at a time in solitude. And Paul was there, reading his first nonfiction and travel books, and then his fiction. It was sort of these conversations that I aspired to have, or maybe never knew I was capable of having. I certainly didn't have them in the Malibu parking lot, but it was the kind of reflections that opened me up, and they made me realize that I was interested in reading and writing on a serious level. I met Paul in 1998. I'd become the editor of Surfing Magazine. And with all this hubris, I thought, well, what could I do to sort of, make an impact here while I'm the editor? And I thought, well, to have a Paul Theroux piece in the magazine would be a huge accomplishment. So I somehow got a hold of him, wrote him a note, asked him to write a piece. He wrote back. I remember it exactly. He said, "I am not a writer, but a paddler," which means that he paddles kayaks a lot, and he's written about that extensively. And he said, "I'm too busy. I'm working on a novel, but I would love to meet you." And so I went to next time I went to the North Shore, we had coffee and we became friends. And I've learned a lot from him. So this conversation takes place at Paul's North Shore home. His wife, Sheila, is nearby. A lot of dark woods, a lot of books, a lot of inspiration. So Paul, welcome to the show.
Nice to see you, Jamie.
So at what point did you know you were a traveler?
My urge to travel came very early, of just fantasizing about it. And funnily enough, so I grew up in coastal New England, near Boston, Massachusetts, and Cape Cod, Massachusetts. So my idea of travel was going to Texas, going to California. So my notion of California, for example, was exotic, sunny, endless summer, palm trees. To an Easterner, the California is glorious, sunny and wonderful. Texas was wild. You think of horses, desert, and so forth. So that was my desire, my fantasy. I think you have a fantasy of travel before you start traveling. Mm-hmm. So I developed that through travel books that I had read. And the travel books that I read were books that were written probably in the after the war, about Africa, Southeast Asia, whatnot, by Richard Halliburton and people going to Africa, Frank Buck, Bring 'Em Back Alive. So I had a fantasy of where I wanted to go in the States and then more widely. Where I actually started to travel was as soon as I got out of college. So I was in high school, then I was in college. So I graduated in 1963 and immediately went to Italy and I got a job. I could speak Italian because I had studied Italian in high school. So Italy was a destination for me. I got a job there. I was a teacher. And that was my first experience of another language, another landscape. The exotic landscape to me then wasn't Africa. It was the Near East. It was Istanbul, Beirut, Lebanon, Egypt. So I thought, and when I applied to join the Peace Corps around that time, 1963, I put down Turkey. I said, I want to go to Turkey. And I got a chance to go to Turkey. I was in Italy then. But I thought, I'm having a nice time in Italy. I had a girlfriend. And I thought, I don't want to go to Turkey now. I said, I'll take the next available place. And it turned out to be Central Africa. So I said, okay, I'll go to Central Africa. The country was called Nyasaland. It's now called Malawi. So I went there when it was still a British protectorate. And I can say that changed my life. Rudyard Kipling said, we only have one virginity to lose. And the place where you lost it will remain forever in your memory. He was talking about travel, actually, rather than a woman.
Yeah.
But actually, I felt that Africa, Central Africa, in 1963, and I stayed in Africa for 6 years. I got kicked out of the Peace Corps after 2 years on a political charge, but that's another story. Then I went to Uganda and stayed in Uganda for 4 years. But Africa was my baptism of fire. I was free as a bird. I learned the language there. It was called Chichewa, and then I learned Swahili. I was a teacher. I had a car. I had a girlfriend and traveled around. I went to Nigeria. I went to Ghana. I went to Kenya and southern Rhodesia. So I traveled a lot in Africa. And that was it. That actually formed my... It was my first experience of a place that was completely exotic, a place where I felt at home because I spoke the language, and a place that kind of formed me and made me a writer because I had something to write about. When I went to Italy, although I spoke Italian and had a job, I never felt capable of writing anything there. So I was still writing, but in Africa, the landscape and the people were so different from anything I'd known that I felt I have a subject. I have a subject that's not my family, not my unhappy childhood, not the state. Kennedy had been shot in November 1963, and that was a traumatic experience for anyone living at the time. But I can't write about that. I had kind of turned against American life and American society. I thought it's violent, it's horrible. And it was also very conservative, too. I mean, in 1963, there were books that you could not buy, books that you could not read, things that you could not say. And I was in Africa where you could do or say anything.
Yep.
And so that informed my travel, and I began writing seriously. And although I had planned to go to medical school in 1963, I didn't have the money to go. I just drifted away, and I kind of fell into writing, living, traveling. After Africa, I went to Southeast Asia. I lived in Singapore. I traveled to Burma. I went to Bali, where surfers had just discovered Bali in the late 60s, I think. I mean, I'm sure they were there before that, but there's quite a surf culture beginning in Bali. Kuta Beach was one of them. And I was there when, you could get a hotel room for $1, just a junky hotel, but pay $1. And it was kind of an empty island in terms of tourists. So I traveled, and travel at that time was kind of exciting because these were places that hadn't been written about. Now everything's been written about. But I felt I could go anywhere, and every place that I went was a discovery.
Yeah.
So, but your question was, what was my first travel? It was Africa, and it was a complete enlightenment. It was like I had no idea the world was like this. I'm discovering things new, and it was like going to, being a pioneer someplace. I can report on this. I can bring this back home and write about it and say, look what I found. This is great.
Yep. One of the things that I remember feeling probably a year, so I was on the world tour for 5 years, about a year into it, and I really got the rhythm of being a traveler and kind of living out of a suitcase and being in new places and feeling just so excited about that. But there was this thing of, I felt kind of exempted from a lot of the expectations that I might have been privy to back home in the US. And then secondly, I had this sense of the ability to reinvent myself. And not to say that I would make up bullshit stories about who I was and my background, but if I wanted to, I could. In other words, my trail, and at the time I was running from family, I was running from, my brother who had serious drug problems at this time. There were things that I was clearly on the run from. And as soon as I landed in a foreign country, they were no longer there trailing me because no one knew my history. I know you've written about this kind of thing.
I have. Do you know there's a book called No Man Knows My History? It's
Great
the
title.
life of Joseph Smith. Joseph Smith, the founder of Mormonism, the translator of the Book of Mormon, theoretically. So he said, no man knows my history. In other words, what I've seen, what I've done, no one knows. And I always thought that's a great line. No man knows. I know exactly what you mean. You go to a new place, you introduce yourself. No one knows where you've been or what you've done, and they judge you by who the person that they see.
Yeah.
And you need to be, in Hawaii the word is pono. You need to be a good guy, pono. Good, righteous. You got to be righteous. You have to be generous. You have to be understanding, and you got to listen. So, and those are the ingredients for traveling and for being a writer and being a good guy, or woman for that matter. I mean, you got to listen.
Yeah.
So the idea of not having this baggage of being in your hometown where people know who you are, what your family's like, all this associated history with you, they don't know anything. They just see the guy there or the woman there, and that's who you are. And I loved that, actually. That you're presenting yourself, and you can falsify it, as you've just said. You could falsify it by saying, well, I've done some amazing things. And you can describe, you can kind of invent a person, or you can just be the person that they discover.
Yeah.
But they have no prior knowledge of you.
Yep.
And I think that one of the more interesting things can happen if you're living for a long term in a place is you learn a language. And then you're conversing with people in their own language, and so you get to know them much better too. And I always felt other people are much more interesting than I am. So I always had a lot of questions. And I was more of an interrogator than a storyteller. So I would go, and I remember early on in Africa talking to people, and I recall very distinctly being in a village in 63, 64, talking to an old guy, and realizing that this person that I'm talking to was born in the 19th century. Was born in 1890, let's say. Would have remembered the First World War. I never tape recorded these conversations, but I always thought, this is amazing. I'm talking to someone who lived in a previous century and saw things that no one I know has ever seen or known. And I often think how amazing it would have been to tape record it. I also think, apropos of travel, when people say, have you been to Bhutan? Have you been to Bali? Have you been to this part of Brazil? And I sometimes think, because I'm an old guy, well, I've been to a place where you have never been. It's called the past. I've been to the past. I was in Rhodesia before it was Zimbabwe. I was in South Vietnam before it was the Republic of Vietnam. I was in the Soviet Union before it was broken up. I was in, Yugoslavia.
Yeah.
Doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
So that's quite an amazing thing, to have been in a place in the past. So the past is a line. The past is another country.
Yeah.
People do things differently there. So I feel that too about travel. But I feel really, really lucky to have seen what I've seen and to have traveled when I've traveled, because although people still travel, and God bless them, it's different now. The world is much more known than it is.
Yep.
And in a way, you're not reporting. There was a time when we were reporting back about strange things in the world. You know, I saw the Taj Mahal, or I saw the Amazon River. Well, you know, you can Google that. You can look at it. It's not news anymore.
Yep. Were you, if you think back, was that curiosity, that hunger there in your childhood in Massachusetts, or was it sort of peaked when you were in Malawi and then it kind of kept growing as you kept traveling? In other words, were you always so curious about people, even as a young man or as a child?
I think the correct answer to that is I come from a very large family, living in a modest-sized house. I come from a lower middle-class family, I suppose you'd say. I'm respectable, but without a lot of money. And there were 7 children. I have 6 siblings. So when you come from a very large family, you either go in 2 directions. One is you all stick together and it's a tribe. And you all kind of rub along in this tribal way of looking inward. It's our house and we're doing things. Or you say, I want to get out of here. I want to leave. There's too many people. There's no privacy. I have people breathing down my neck, and also people saying, you know, if I had said, I want to be a writer, they'd laugh at me. They'd say, why do you want to be a writer? Just, I suppose, if someone grew up in Missouri or Iowa and said, I want to be a surfer, they'd say, that's stupid, man. You want to be a surfer? Like, where's the surf, man? You'll never... And you say, well, I'll go to California, I'll find surf. Yeah, that's ridiculous. So saying you want to be a writer in a big family is kind of out of the norm. So my desire to travel arises out of this visceral desire to leave this family, to get away from the family. And apropos of going to a new place and being a new person is this process called individuation, where you go to a place to discover who you are.
Yeah.
Individuation is discovering yourself, your secret self, the self that you believe in. So you go to a person, so you might not tell anyone at home, I want to be a writer, but you would go to Vietnam or Uganda, and someone says, so what do? You'd say, well, I'm a writer, or I want to be a writer. Where you would, if you're in high school, you're not going to, your local high school, I want to be a writer, they'd laugh at you.
Yep.
But you can disclose these secrets, this inner life, to strangers in a way that you can't to people that you know. And if someone tells me they want to be a writer, I always say, well, do you live at home? Yeah. I say, well, number 1, leave home. Number 2, read a book. Number 3, get a job.
Yeah.
But in that order.
Yeah.
You got to get away from anyone who's going to discourage you, but you have to leave. So I really had this strong desire to leave. First, California seemed to me a great destination. It seemed a place very balmy. I thought, well, it doesn't snow in California. There's no ice in California. There's no, I just thought it's the beach, it's sunshine, and when you come from a cold place, that's a very, very welcoming kind of thought. It's the idea of go to a warm place.
Yeah.
But getting out of a big family, because families are such conflicted, in my view, such conflicted situations. I wrote a novel about my family called Motherland. And Motherland is all about that. It's all about how tribal and difficult family life is. But it turned me into a traveler.
Yep.
Reading also turned me into a traveler.
Yeah. The individuation thing is so interesting because what I've always thought about, and it's interesting because we're sitting in Hawaii talking, as a young surfer, for so many of us, for generations, I would say, The Endless Summer kind of was such an influential film in the sense that it laid down this blueprint that to be a surfer was to be a traveler. And it happens on, for me, I started surfing in LA County, Malibu Beach, and then the winter would come, there'd be a swell up in Santa Barbara, I'd go up there, then there'd be another swell, I'd go up to Santa Cruz. Next thing you know, I'm coming over to Hawaii to chase swells. And so surfers typically go chase great waves around the world. And the point of it is to ride the great waves. But what kind of is baked into that is the individuation and is this self-discovery in this sort of long odyssey of being a surfer. But it's so interesting I feel sort of kinship with you, yet we would never have run into each other in the surf, and I probably would not have been going to a lot of the really remote places that you went to, but I feel like I had the experience of that self-discovery on the road.
Well, thank you. I do feel that it's that travel is finding out about other places, also finding out about yourself. What can I do in this place? Can I get a job? Can I work here? Can I survive here? Also, can I meet chicks?
Yeah.
I mean, will I fall in love? Will I meet people? Surfers are like a band of brothers anyway. So you can, and they say, we can do this, drink here, do that. But the reason why I can relate to a surfer is that a surfer goes to a place to test himself or herself. They're going, can I ride that wave? First, can I find the wave? Can I ride the wave? Can I find an even bigger wave? And will I be able to overcome this, go to a place where there's a challenge? I've had this experience as a paddler, paddling a kayak. So traveling in the Pacific with a folding kayak. So I had this kayak, a Klepper kayak, a very seaworthy kayak that I put in 2 bags. And I would go to different places, the Cook Islands, the Marquesas, Tahiti, New Guinea, Australia, New Zealand. Every place that I went, I set up the kayak and I thought, can I paddle my kayak here? Can I find an offshore island? Can I camp on the beach? Can I do a circumnavigation of this island? Can I get outside the reef? You know, I did it in the north, near Cooktown in Australia.
Uh-huh.
Big waves and, kind of a challenge. But going to a place and meeting the challenge. So that's, I've never surfed, as you know. I'm not a surfer. I've been watching surfers for the whole time, 32 years living in Hawaii. Fascinated by it. But the idea that a surfer goes to a place, he's never ridden the wave, he's only heard about the wave. You have to go to the place, study the wave, talk to people, watch, just look at the wave, find out about it. It has a character, it has a form, it has a shape, it has a power.
Yeah.
There's an inner power that it has. There's under the wave, there's where's the trough, where's the reef? And you kind of do that, and it's a problem to solve, and then you do it. You're riding the wave. I would have thought, that's such a rush. Mm-hmm. And so that's travel, too, of going to a place to discover something about the place and something related to discovering something about yourself.
Yep. So we are sitting in your study up Pupukea Heights on the North Shore of Oahu. You've been here for how long?
I've lived in this house for 30 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's so interesting because you're obviously aware of this, but you live like right smack in the middle of a surfing mecca. And the very thing we're talking about, the people that we sort of pass through the aisles of Foodland or pass on the driving up and down the Cam Highway are here for the very reason, they've come for these waves from long distances away in the wintertime. What's your relationship with surfing here on the North Shore?
I know a lot of surfers, and in fact, when I first came here to the North Shore, so I came to Hawaii 32 years ago. 30 years, I didn't like living in Honolulu. I don't like suburban life, and I don't like living among a lot of people. So to me, the North Shore was empty. It had waves, but it had funky houses, bungalows. There weren't a lot of rich people here, and the beaches were pretty empty. Mm-hmm. You could never fail to find a parking space or an empty beach. But one of the earliest friends I had here was Audrey Sutherland, who's a paddler. She paddled up and down the inland waterway of Alaska.
Okay.
And wrote a book about it. She paddled around Molokai. So she was a paddler, Audrey. Older than me by about 20 years, but still game. So she's the mother of Jock Sutherland. Mm-hmm. So one of the first people I met here was Audrey. And we paddled together. We paddled Malaikahana, Haleiwa, Waimea. She had a funky little kayak, and I had this folding kayak. And then I met Jock, and she showed me a picture of Jock riding a wave in Waimea. It's in her book, Paddling Hawaii. So Jock's right at the top of this giant wave, really, really big wave. And he's sitting there, I'm thinking, this is a hero. This guy he's like Ulysses, in the Odyssey. Uh-huh. He's on this wave. It's an iconic figure. And I thought, how do you get to the wave? How do you get off the wave? So I met Jock, and I realized Jock is not a professional surfer. He surfs for the love of it. He can surf anything, but he's always lived in Hawaii, and he's a roofer. So he fixes roofs, and he lives with his mother. And the break, Jocko's.
Yep.
Jocko's is right there near Chun's. It's just to the left of Chun's Reef, as you know. And so to have a break named after you is, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
That's cooler than having a street named after you or a building named after you. Imagine a wave. That would be my ultimate. So I met him, and then the people who knew him, and they always seemed like very cool guys, very expert at what they were doing, very conversational. He's a smart guy. His mother was a writer, and he's earning a living. And he was just working to surf. I knew a guy at the post office, Forrest Furman. So Forrest came to Hawaii to work at the post office for one reason, so that he could surf. Mm-hmm. We go bike riding these days. He still surfs, but regular guys. I didn't know guys on the tour or anything like that. But the idea that these guys surfed big waves and lived their lives, but lived for surfing, worked so they could surf, I thought was very cool. And I could understand it because it was their passion, and I could relate to the passion because my passion was writing and also getting out of the house, getting on the water. Mm-hmm. Swimming, snorkeling, paddling. There was, and to a certain extent, surfing myself. I mean, I have an outrigger canoe, an OC1. I can surf very, very small, bumps. I surf the bumps. And I get a rush out of that. But I can relate to that.
Yep.
So my experience of surfers was that I never really knew many guys who were in the Triple Crown.
Yep.
I mean, I know them now. I know Garrett, and I know some others. Eddie Vedder. He's not on the tour, but he's a great surfer. He surfs for fun. And I met Kelly Slater and those people, so I know them. But if you live in the North Shore, you're always seeing them.
Yep.
You can tell them if they're 50 feet away. You can tell just by their shoulders, their waist, and they're barefoot usually.
Yeah.
But you can tell. There's a certain build of a very successful surfer. There's probably a build for a wimpy surfer too, or a guy who's not that good. But you can tell a good surfer just the profile, the gestalt, as they say. Just okay, that guy's a surfer. The build. It's not the tattoos or anything like that, but it's a certain build. And so I've been seeing that forever.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's also, there's the other thing that I've noticed in all my years. I mean, I've been coming here since probably 1982. The big kind of resource of the North Shore is the waves, right? Like such a majority of the residents are out in that surf, and maybe I won't say the majority, but a lot of them are waiting for the big days. When those big days come, it's kind of, it's palpable in every sense. Like it's palpable in the sense of you come down the hill here and you look out at Sharks Cove and Three Tables and you see the waves pounding, you see them at Waimea Bay. But then you can being very sensitive and attuned to it, I've noticed that you find it in the supermarket, you find it in the restaurant that evening in the conversations. When the surf's pumping, there's just the sort of, the mood is elevated on some level. People are excited. People are kind of buzzing off of it. But I'm sure you've experienced this, right?
Yeah, I was going to use that same word, the buzz. There's usually a buzz. It's coming.
Yep.
Something's coming. It's coming. And you can tell, Hawaiians are able to read the movement of water. And so when Hawaiians came to Hawaii early on, in the earliest time, possibly 2,000 years ago, when they came from the Marquesas or Tahiti, they could read the water. The way the water was behaving, the waves, the current, the little twigs that were floating on it, the movement of birds. And they could read that, along with reading the stars, they could read the surface of the water. And to a very large extent, some of this buzz of it's coming comes from looking at the horizon and seeing the way the waves are coming in, the form, the contour of the waves, and then what's behind them, and how they're building. And then you're looking at the beach and you see the waves kind of building on the beach, and you see a place where there was sand, but there's no sand there anymore. There's a big rock because the sand's been sucked into the water because the waves are building. And all of that builds that buzz. And then I think that surfers are able to read that.
Yeah.
And they communicate that buzz. So you can see there's a hum of anticipation and expectation that you get when the big day is coming. And then, so we're speaking now near Waimea Bay, and I can usually see it coming. And then I'm driving, there's more traffic. But then you also see when the eddy's coming, they start building a judge's stand. You start building stuff on Waimea Bay, and you say, well, they're going to have the eddy, because you start seeing activity, commercial activity, or people start showing up and people surfing. Then it happens.
Yep.
And then you get the big day.
Yep.
Or sometimes it doesn't happen. They have the expectation. You and I were talking a while back. Remember the day the eddy didn't happen?
Yes. I mean, I flew over thinking it was going to happen, and it was a no-go, and I flew back the next day.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think a lot of other people did the same thing.
Yeah.
The eddy is fascinating that way, and I think it really kind of illustrates the life of a surfer. It's a very exaggerated version of it, because it needs a certain size and quality to happen, and it happens less than it does. It doesn't happen less than it does. And there are these folks around the world, the invitees, who are on standby for this thing for 3 months out of the year, whatever it is, 2 months. But Waimea is my next question. So you recently wrote Under the Wave at Waimea about a surfer. It's about a lot of things, but surfing figures largely into it. How did that come about? What inspired you to write this book?
I started writing the book very soon after two things happened. One was I was walking down the beach. I've actually told you this story before, but I can repeat the story. I was walking near Lani's, and there's a bridge, and I looked down, and I have my bike, and because there were traffic, I looked down from the bridge. It was a very hot day. It was a hot early afternoon. I had just come from the post office, and I was walking my bike across this bridge. I looked down at the dry, sandy riverbed, and I saw a guy, obviously a surfer, I could tell from his build, making love to a woman. They were just lying on and their surfboards were nearby.
Wow.
They were just, lying there in the most wonderful way. And I kind of, taken aback, I didn't want to stare, but I thought, this is amazing. So I thought, well, this is a surfer. This couldn't be anybody else. This is not two people who were snorkeling on the beach. They're not tourists. They spent the morning surfing, and now they're making love. And then they're going to have lunch, and they're just going to have a beer and chill, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I started to think, who's this guy? Who's this woman? So I thought, I want to write something about a surfer, because this is like only in surfing culture. And then another experience I had was, when you get older, you start relating to older people. And I thought, well, I see old surfers go, they look old, their tattoos are faded, but they're still out on a wave.
Yeah.
And I'm an older writer, and my tattoos are fading, and I'm still writing. And I'm thinking, well, I could relate to that. Mm-hmm. I'm still doing it, although I look like an old geezer, and these guys look old. I saw a guy yesterday, actually. He was talking with Sir. He said, I said, were you out? This guy is 72. He said, yeah. I said, where were you? He said, Himalayas. He was surfing Himalayas.
Okay. Yeah, yesterday
and
was big.
He said he had a 9-foot board, and he was surfing and catching big waves. 72 years old. Does anyone know his name? No. You've never heard of him. He's just a guy who's been surfing. He's never been in Surfer's Journal. He's never been in Surfer's Monthly. No one has ever heard of him. Uh-huh. He's just a guy who loves surfing. Now so when he said he was surfing, this was yesterday. I saw him. He was riding a bike, and I was riding a bike. And I thought, well, this is a book. This is a book. It's the guy making love under the bridge. It's the woman with him, who's also a surfer. So all those things come together, and you think, I can relate to that. Mm-hmm. I'm like that. The only way I can write a book is by identifying with the people in the book.
Yep.
There isn't a single book that I've written, and I've written 30-odd novels. Mm-hmm. There isn't a single one where I don't relate to the person in the book, the main character, or some of the characters in the book. I'm not making up stories.
Yep.
The stories are coming from inside me. And living in Hawaii, I've written 2 books set in Hawaii. One is called Hotel Honolulu. The other, as you mentioned, is Under the Wave at Waimea. Both of them are from inside me as well as outside me. So you can't live on the North Shore and not be curious about waves and surfers. The house that we're in, so this is my studio where I work. This was all built by surfers. It was roofed by Jock Sutherland. The guys who did the windows, the drywall, they're all surfers. When there was a big surf day, they didn't come.
Yeah.
But I knew them all. There were a dozen guys.
Yep.
And if there was big surf, they finished the house.
Yep.
Anyway.
Yep. When you started writing your novel, were you able to sort of draw, had you already had an ear for the way surfers talk, the things they talk about? I mean, did you already feel like I've kind of penetrated that world to some degree?
Oh, yeah. You hear it all the time.
Yep.
You hear it all the time. And my near neighbor he used to shape boards. He also used to supply guys with mushrooms.
Oh, yes. I remember him.
Yeah. When you collect the mushroom, where I go bike riding, you collect the mushrooms.
We won't mention his name, but you just confirmed, because I knew of him as the Mushroom Man for a long time, and then I knew his real name, which I won't mention. But I wondered where he got the nickname the Mushroom Man. I thought it was maybe because he'd done a lot of mushrooms, but I didn't realize.
No, collects them.
Okay.
Collects them, and he's a supplier.
Okay.
And I know where he gets them. You get them on where there are cows. After rain, the cow pats, they sprout on the cow pats.
Yep.
He's a board shaper. He's introduced me to surfers. He's a surfer. He's a spotter for surfers. Nice guy, actually. I mean, very helpful, sweet guy, and very knowledgeable. You know, it's part of the network. You can't, anyone who works for you here, or works with you, or you hang out with, has some relation to surfing.
Yeah.
Unless you're rich.
Yeah.
And stupid and uninterested, and you're just a part-timer, a malihini, as they say, or a tourist or something. If you're not that, if you live here and you care, and especially if you care about the beach, the condition of the beach, are people leaving stuff on the beach, are people littering the beach? If you care about, if you at heart you want to preserve the place, you're a surfer. I mean, surfers don't wreck things. They're not into violating a beach. They want to keep it the way it is.
Yeah. I mean, there's a thing that we surfers say, sort of patting ourselves on the back, but that we're inherently environmentalists, because we're out in that water every day, and we know when it's dirty after a rain, you feel it. I mean, you can get sick from it, and so you're very much attuned to keeping that water clean and keeping the ocean clean.
Probably the only thing that a surfer ever did that was environmentally unfriendly is leaving a fin on the reef. Right.
Yeah. There's a lot of that.
You're surfing and your fin gets stuck in the reef. But apart from that, no, you leave no trace. You leave no trace.
Yep. You're listening to Soundings with Jamie Brisick. This podcast and the Surfer's Journal are made possible due to TSJ's subscribing members and through the sponsorship of Birdwell, FCS, Patagonia, Rainbow, Vans, Vissla, and Yeti. To learn more about the Surfer's Journal and its sponsors, or to subscribe, visit surfersjournal.com. Now back to our guest, Paul Theroux. You wrote a profile of Garrett McNamara some years back, and it was in Smithsonian Magazine. I remember reading it, and it was interesting. One of the things that really stayed with me was in Nazareth, there were a lot of widows because their husbands had been lost to the ocean. They were fishermen who'd gotten basically cleaned up by big waves. What was it like writing that? I mean, I know you went to Nazareth. You spoke to a lot of people.
I found meeting Garrett for the first time a wonderful experience, because it seemed like he set himself a problem, which is to find a 100-foot wave, to find the biggest wave, the most humongous wave that he could possibly surf. And he looked all over for it. I thought there's a lot of preparation in surfing a wave. I even thought someone like Garrett could be a motivational speaker. How do you ride a 100-foot wave? You don't just look at the wave and ride it. You need to study it, know it, get acquainted with it. And so he was put onto this wave at Nazareth by a guy who said, we have this big wave, but Nazareth is a place of death. Women wear black clothes. Many fishermen have drowned there. Ships have foundered there. It's just a place where there's this big, destructive wave. Well, they saw it as destructive. To them, it was an evil thing. It was just this wave offshore, like force of nature that's going to come to shore. It's going to grab you and drown you. And so it was known as a kind of, in a morbid way, as a place where it's just danger and death. So Garrett, in a very, very ingenious way, proved to them this wave is a force of nature for the good too. What you need to do is ride it. You're not conquering the wave. He said, you're complementing the wave. You're showing that you can ride it. And in that way, you're showing the people on shore that I'm not going to die. It's like the sword and the stone. It's like a kind of story where you prove that the giant is actually friendly. You know, in Frankenstein is actually rather a sweet-natured creature. He's not a monster who's going to kill people. Frankenstein is kind of a nice guy. I mean, he's sweet. He has feelings. He's an unhappy monster. And so the wave at Nazareth is this thing that rises up. So what Garrett proved, there's a book called The Jungle is Neutral. And what he proved is the wave is neutral. The wave isn't evil. The wave isn't good. The wave is neutral. It comes in, it rises, it mounts, it falls, it breaks, and it's not there anymore. So it's not an evil thing. I even wonder whether evil as a concept exists, that maybe that wave is the proof of it. So Nazareth, to me, I went there, I didn't see big waves there, but I've been there with Garrett and alone, and Garrett kind of created, by showing that Nazareth, the town and the wave, are basically neutral. On a sunny day, it's the nicest place in the world. That this is now an extremely popular place for people to go hang out, have meals, go swimming, surf.
Yep.
And then when the waves up, they surf it. And they're kind of, it's like, I suppose you could say it's like the Eiger, like Mont Blanc, like a big mountain that people climb. The mountain is there. You climb it. Maybe you'll die. Maybe you'll make it. But the mountain is forever. It's just there. It's godlike in a way, and so you prove that. He proved that he didn't die, that he did it, and the way he went about it strikes me. It was a whole part of a plan. I thought it's wonderful. I even thought, let's write a book, how to surf a 100-foot wave, like a motivational manual.
Yeah,
like you've got this thing. There's the 100-foot wave. How do you go about surfing it? Everyone has a wave in their life. A divorce, someone died, you got fired, you got a disease, whatever it is. How do you overcome that?
Yeah.
That's the wave.
Yep.
And how do you ride that wave? So I thought, meeting Garrett was a wonderful experience. He's a great guy, and I loved writing. And he was also, it helped me inform my novel, Under the Wave at Waimea. So knowing him, he's in the book, actually. That's an extreme example of surfing.
Yeah.
But he's also surfed big waves created by
calving
icebergs.
Yes, yeah, I saw that.
And that's another amazing thing that he's done.
Yeah. How many books have you published at this point in your life?
I published 50 odd, say 55, 56, 30 odd novels, 12 travel books, and then books of essays, things like that. I never really wanted to have a job. I wanted to travel. I wanted to be happy. I didn't want to owe any money to people. I wanted my privacy. I wanted to just live my life. And, freedom is expensive. So you get that you could get a job and work with someone. I didn't function very well as an employee. But I thought, if I publish a book almost every year, I don't need to have a bestseller. All I have to do is publish a book almost every year. I'll have a living. I'll make a living. So I wrote my first book around 1964, 1965. It was published in 67. And since 1967, however long that is, I've published a book practically every year. And some years, 2 books. I've done journalism. I do book reviews. I've done... people say, can you write this? Yeah, I say, I never turn down any reasonable offer. I don't even turn down unreasonable offers. I thought, I want to make a living. I don't want to work for someone. And to me, the most hateful thing that anyone can say to me is, there's a meeting on Thursday, be there. I would think, what the fuck are you talking about? At the meeting? You go to the meeting. I'm not going to the fucking meeting.
Yep.
So, I mean, that's kind of my question authority moment. But it used to happen to me because I was a teacher in Africa, and then a teacher in Singapore, and then I taught for one semester at the University of Virginia, which was 1971. That's the last job I had. I thought, I really don't like this. People telling me, you're going to do that. I thought, I got other plans.
Yep.
I got other plans. I don't want to. I want to go do my own thing.
There are a lot of surfers listening to this right now, probably chuckling and going, I know that one so well, because what you're talking about with your love of writing, so many surfers have with their love of surfing. And there are these quote unquote jobs that really interfere with that. So I identify with that very much.
A job can be a terrible thing. It can be, I suppose, it can be a helpful thing. If you've got a job that you love, I think that can be an enlightenment, something that you love doing. I love writing. To me, it's not a job. It's a process of life. I think a surfer is an amphibious creature. A surfer is an amphibian who, when he's on land, would love to be in the water and just wants to be in the water. And he sees the water as his natural element.
Yeah.
Who is he when he's in the water? That's who he is.
Yes.
So I can't despise a job because I needed actually to make a living. I had a family to support. So at first I had a job to support the family. And then when I realized I could make a living writing, I thought I never wanted a job. But I mean, I feel for anyone who has to have a job to support whatever his love is, whether it's love of surfing or writing or painting or whatever it is. You need to support that passion. But the ideal thing is that the passion becomes profitable enough or sustaining enough so that you could go on doing it.
Yep. Your output is massive, and I wonder, when you're not traveling, when you're here or in Cape Cod, what's a typical work day like? How does it go?
I wake up in the middle of the night thinking about my work. I wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning, and my first thought is usually something that I've been writing. And I have a thought. Often I have a good thought. Then I go back to sleep. I'm a good sleeper and a good dreamer. So after breakfast, which is about 8 o'clock, I have a cup of tea, and then I set off. And I go, and I like to go from sleep to eating to work without an argument, much talk, without a telephone call, without any interruption, without any human voice in my ear. I like to go from one to the other. And my wife works. I mean, my wife is very contented, very productive. So she's happy in what she do. But I need to slide from sleep to writing. Or when I say writing, I mean sitting at my desk. It's not, I don't sit down and start scribbling. I sit down and think, and I look at my work, and I sometimes recopy it. So it takes a while to get my engine going. But I work every day, every weekday anyway. And I work, so I start writing. If I sit down at 9, maybe I'll start writing at 10, maybe later. Maybe I'll only write a sentence. Maybe I'll write a couple of pages. Then I work till lunchtime, 1 o'clock, 1:30. After lunch in Hawaii, that's a problem, because on a sunny day, there's no way that I would sit at my desk on this sunny day and work. I just can't do it. Knowing that it's sunny, it's beautiful outside, and the waves are crashing, I always go to the beach in the afternoon, either to read, to write, to swim, to do whatever. But I leave. I just go. I can't sit in this place with the sun shining. I just can't do it.
Yep.
And I suppose that comes out of, I lived in London for about 17 years. I was married to a different woman then. And I suppose this hankering for sunshine, for good weather, comes from that, because bad weather kept me inside. And I thought in the afternoon, I'd have lunch, then I'd sit down. What do you do? It's raining. The weather's lousy. What else is there to do? We'll sit and write, or go to a museum, or walk around, or ride my bike, maybe. But my dream was to go to the beach, finish work, go to the beach. So I do that. So my day is structured like that, which is sleep, work in the morning, lunch, having a coffee after lunch looking west at the sunshine, to me is one of the best parts of the day. And then going to the beach. And often at the beach, I have a clipboard. I write at the beach.
Yeah.
And I've had some, I wrote in Under the Wave at Waimea, my last novel. I wrote most of it at the beach. I wrote scribble on a piece of paper, and then I come back, and in the morning I would recopy that, and then recopy it to a point where I'd be able to begin again. A lot of writing is rewriting. It's not sitting down at a computer and saying tap tap tap. It was a dark and stormy day. A lot of it is exploring the possibility of writing. So you write, you rewrite, you get a second thought, you start again. But recopying, to me, rewriting that's what writing is.
Yep.
Rewriting.
Yep.
And so I sold my papers to the Huntington Library about 3-4 years ago, and they had to send a truck to pick the paper because I write so many drafts of books that it filled the trunk with these banker's boxes, just full of boxes of first draft, second draft, third draft. So I write all these drafts in longhand, then I type them. I'm a pretty good typist, but I've never sat down and typed a novel. I've always written it in longhand. I started off doing that. I still do that. That's what my day is like. Saturday, I do gardening. I probably would go for a bike ride. Sunday's not a working day for me. I dick around, maybe gardening, maybe go swimming. So it's a 5-day week, I guess you could say. But I've been doing it, since I joined the Peace Corps in '63. Since then, I mean, it's almost 60 years of doing it. And then so it's a routine. And people say to me, well, when are you going to stop? Ask Bob Dylan when he's going to stop. He's my age. Ask Bob Dylan when he's going to stop singing, okay? Maybe when he loses his voice or something, but he's still grooving.
Yep.
And why would I stop? To do what?
Yeah.
To play golf? I don't think so.
Yep.
To sit around. And I feel, that's why I love old surfers. A surfer who's an older guy is a healthy guy. He's living his bliss, passion, but also he's healthy doing it. He's swimming.
Yep.
He's paddling out on the wave. He's catching the wave. This guy, is there anything healthier than that?
Yeah. No, I know that's something that I think about a lot because I spend a lot of times ass in the chair at my desk writing, and while I've over the year, it's taken a long time, but I've developed a good writing practice, and I can sit for long periods. But it took a long time to do that because I grew up surfing, and there was nothing more natural for me than to jump in the water and do this thing that for a long time was my livelihood. And it was also there was nothing in the world I'd rather do, and nothing made me feel better. I mean, surfers are so fortunate in the sense that this activity, this passion, this thing that they love is also, it lifts your mood. It keeps you physically fit. You're mentally fit. You're spiritually fit. There's so much to it, and it's hard. It's hard to you kind of get you experience this thing that's hard. There's everything else sort of pales in comparison.
Do you know what keeps you in a chair? Smoking. So when I gave up smoking in 1981. However long, so that's 40 years ago. I still miss it. I loved smoking when I smoked. But when you smoke, I smoked a pipe, cigarettes and then a pipe. But when you're sitting in a chair is really difficult, just sitting for a long period of time. Yeah. I don't like doing it.
Yep.
I was always restless. But when I was smoking, so you smoke a pipe, when you feel like you're getting up, you light your pipe, puff, 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 and it kind of relaxes your muscle. It kind of puts you in a zone of work. And since I stopped smoking, which was, as I said, 40 years ago, I've been very restless sitting in a chair. But smoking, probably drinking, having a drink, being slightly buzzed,
yes,
keeps you in a chair.
Yep.
But I can't think of anything less healthy or more destructive than sitting for a long period of time.
Yep.
And sitting and smoking is like a death sentence. I mean, that's just terrible.
Yep.
But that's how you do it. So I hate sitting in a chair.
Yeah.
But sitting at the beach is different. I mean, I have a beach chair, folding chair. I get down, sit in the beach. That's no problem. Sitting, looking at waves. I always think a person who's looking at a wave is never idle. That the whole process what happens to your mind and your body, looking at the sea, looking at the wave, is a process that is so enlightening, so reflective, that it keeps your mind moving. And to me, that's like the ultimate high of just looking at waves coming in. And to me, nothing. I can't think of anything. I can't think of any drug. I can't think of any drink, which is as life-affirming as looking at waves, looking at the sea and looking at waves.
Yeah. What do you like most, having been in Hawaii for all these years and spending, I guess, half the year for the most part? What do you like most about Hawaii?
There are many things about Hawaii. One is the idea that, as you and I are both barefoot, being barefoot. So being in a place that is body temperature, right? So we're in body temperature. Being in a place where there's a culture that goes deep into the soil.
Yep.
So we're in my little studio. But if we took a walk about 100 yards down in the valley here, we would see piles of stones. They're called heiaus. So a heiau is a spiritual place where people worshipped. So the idea that there's a spiritual sense. So you go, okay, to some people it's a woods or jungle or whatever. There's ironwood trees, there's bamboo and all. But actually, it's a holy place. So the idea that there's a culture that, we're near Waimea Bay, which is one of the ancient settlements. Captain Vancouver was here. 2 of his men actually went ashore and they were killed and eaten right down there. A ship called the Antelope, right in Waimea Bay, because they strayed off the beaten path. So what I like about it is that it's this mountain in the sea, surrounded by surf, where there's traditional culture, where you can live simply, barefoot, in a bathing suit, and work. And you can use every moment of the day. You don't say, in cold countries, people say, we should do something next April. Yeah, next April we should go for a bike ride. Yeah, that's a good idea. Well, I could go a bike ride this afternoon or tomorrow.
Yep.
You don't have to procrastinate. You don't have to put anything off. Okay, people would say, well, there's no symphony orchestra, or there's an inferior one. There's no opera. The museum isn't that great. Whatever. So there's the things that you would find in a big city don't exist here. But so what?
Yep.
So what? Instead of looking at what it doesn't have, you look what it has. I quite like the food. I love the people. I go paddling twice a week with 3 Hawaiian guys who are workers at Schofield Barracks. They're maintenance men. And we relate. I mean, we go paddling together. They have outrigger canoes. Having friends here, particularly friends who are Hawaiian, it's a big compliment, actually, to have friends who are, kama'aina, keiki o ka'aina, children of the soil, keiki o ka'aina, children of the land and of the aina. That's a big thing. The other thing is that I'm a gardener. You and I could go and pick an avocado right, 20 feet away and eat it tonight. That's quite nice. You can't do that in New York.
Yep.
So I like a lot of, so these are all, I suppose, the natural qualities, the people, the land, the culture, all of that, the language, all of those recommend it to me. And I suppose I can work here. The other thing is, when you travel to a place, many people will have this experience, surfers, travelers. You go to a place and you say, my God, this place it's amazing, but I'd hate to die here. I could die here. I could die on this wave. I could die on that volcano. I wouldn't mind dying here. A place where you want to live is a place where you wouldn't mind dying. Die here and sprinkle my ashes over there. But I used to live in England, and when I lived in England, I thought, if I die here, God help me, this would be terrible. It's wet. It'll be a rainy day. They'll shovel me into the soil, and I don't want to be there. It's different here.
Yeah. It's such a great lifestyle. So, having traveled for all these years, how is traveling different now than it was when you started out?
Traveling is completely different now. A surfer will tell you that. A regular traveler will tell you that. An older guy or an older woman will tell you that. It's not the same. There was a time when travel was a kind of discovery which was almost incomparable. Seeing the Panama Canal for the first time, seeing the Taj Mahal for the first time, going to Burma, going to Angkor Wat, seeing the Australian outback, whatever it is, seeing Tahiti, legendary places, and seeing them. You've never seen them before. Maybe you saw a picture of it, and having this, seeing a herd of elephants in Africa, which I have seen the first time. It's an extraordinary experience. Well, it's not like that now. The Rift Valley in Kenya, where there were a lot of elephants, is now full of people. It's filled with people. And so if you drive through the Rift Valley from Nairobi to Kampala, you see the Rift Valley, which is huge. It was formed by volcanism. The great rift in the earth was empty and green when I saw it. Now it's just people, people everywhere. So people everywhere is one of the things. That you don't travel in the same spirit. You don't travel to see something for the first time. You're not reporting back. It's not that people are jaded. It's just that the world is full of people who are traveling. So travel has changed, but that doesn't mean the nature of travel has changed, but there's still a lot to discover about travel. So although people are saying travel is over, it's not over. It's just the things that people are looking at are different. So people are looking at global poverty, they're looking at crises, they're looking at climate change, they're looking at immigration. So the last two books that I've written, one traveling around the deep south, southern United States, very poor but fascinating, or going to Mexico, also weird, unexplored, some of it, or hardly known. That also was an enlightenment to me. So one was Deep South, the book about the South. The other is On the Plain of Snakes, about Mexico. I was going there, not as a tourist, not the way people traveled before. Oh, I'm going to go to Mexico and see a church, or I'm going to go to Mexico and see a pyramid. I was going to Mexico to see them making mezcal, to see what immigration was like, to see there's people on the border. What are the villages that they're fleeing from? So what does a Mexican village look like? A place that people are leaving? Why are you going? Why are you trying to get to Colorado to work in a meatpacking plant? Why don't you stay here?
Right.
But you understand why they're leaving. So that's how travel has changed, and the books are different too. I mean, so it's not about the same kind of touristic discovery. It's about different subjects, less sexy maybe.
Yeah.
Less romantic maybe.
Yep.
But just as valuable.
Yep. Are there any places that you want to see and write about anytime soon?
There's lots of places I'd like to go back to see what happened to them. How did they get completely screwed up? Like the first country that I was in, Malawi, Nyasaland, had a population of 3 million people. It now has a population of 19 million people. So why is it overpopulated? Why is it so poor? Why didn't it happen? Politically, economically, socially, whatever. So going back to a place is very instructive and amazing, actually. Going back to a place with an empty beach. You'd see now condominiums, you'd see bars and so forth. Where there was just a beach and a wave. Bali is a perfect example of that. What happened to Bali? So I'd like to go back to places. Then there's places that I would like to visit that I've never been. I've never been to Greenland. I'm a kayaker. Well, the Greenland kayak culture created some of the great watercraft of the world, and people even living there. So I'd like to. It's a big, empty place. I've never been to Scandinavia. I've never been to Greenland.
Yeah. No. On the note of change, how has the North Shore changed in the time that you've been here?
The North Shore of Oahu has changed completely. It used to be kind of an empty. People in town call it the country. Let's go into the country. My wife, who was born or who grew up in Honolulu, always regarded as a country, kind of far, slightly unknown, not dangerous exactly, but you in Hawaii, you got to be careful where you go. You're marked out as a stranger. She always saw it as kind of an iffy place. How has it changed? When I first came here, the first saw it 32 years ago, it's kind of empty. You could always find a parking space at Waimea Bay. The beach was pretty empty. The waves, not a lot of surface here. Now there's too many people. There's too many houses, too many people, there's too many cars, there's too many restaurants. There's just too much tourism. So it's changed to that extent. And the pressure on the North Shore, which is, you think of it, big waves, big rocks. It's a fragile place. This is a fragile ecosystem.
Yeah.
And it's being eroded,
Yep.
changed. And that's a bad thing. So people have to find a way of curbing. They're trying to make a living. They're trying to be to have some viability economically, but at great cost.
No, absolutely. I mean, the thing that we surfers talk about is what drew a lot of people. What drew the surfers to the North Shore were the waves. And that surfing lifestyle is, you want to be in the water all day long, so you're not necessarily a careerist. So these are folks getting by on not a lot of money. And you used to be able to live simply out here. You can't anymore. So the surfers who kind of take most advantage of this coastline are no longer able to afford to live out here, and they live in Wailua, Wahiwa, etc.
One of the worst things you can ever say about a place is it's paradise. People said it about Bali. They said it about Hawaii. They said it about Bora Bora. They said it about Tahiti. I suppose they said it about Caribbean islands. This paradise. As soon as a place is paradise, it becomes purgatory, and then it becomes hell.
I think that's a great out. Thank you so much, Paul, for talking. It was a pleasure as always.
Okay. Jamie, this has been a pleasure talking to you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Soundings is produced by me, Jamie Brisick, and Jonathan Shiflett. You can find it on Apple, Stitcher, and Spotify. Our theme song is Ocean Parkway by the Gun Trusinski Duo. You can find more of their music on Spotify. Soundings is brought to you by the Surfer's Journal, a reader-supported publication made possible by sponsorship from Birdwell, FCS, Patagonia, Rainbow, Vans, Vissla, and Yeti. The Surfer's Journal is published 6 times a year. Along with the magazine, subscribers receive unlimited access to every article from its 30-year archive, as well as members-only access to additional digital content, exclusive film screenings, and sponsor offers. For more information, visit surfersjournal.com. Thanks again for listening to Soundings, and we will see you again.